Well, hi folks, here we are again, another Tuesday evening, another live show. Great to have you on. And we'll just put the pre-show on for a second or two and let everybody just make their way in. Good to see names on the board already, and Cookie Boy and a few others there too. A few suggestions as other people we might talk to. I'm always open to suggestions as to people that we could get on the channel, so always make those suggestions. Can't always follow them up, but well, there's always plenty of opportunity to bring other perspectives in. A suggestion about Peter Tulip, for example, ex-RBA, who's somebody who a number of people follow quite closely now. Of course, the idea is to build more densely. That'll solve the housing problem and house prices. So that's where he goes. He was responsible for the RBA's model, which is the one that Christopher Joy criticises quite dramatically these days, which is quite amusing in its own right. But we'll get into that a bit later. Just before I bring the main show on, I'll just show you the doggies are there. So they've been sound asleep, been out for a few walks today. We had rain this morning, but not too bad later. And they're now happily there. So obviously very intent on what's going on, but that's okay. We'll get on with the show anyway. Right, I'll take the pre-show off. Going to run the intro. I'll be back in just a second. Well, good evening and welcome to this live stream on the 14th of February 2023. Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics here. Great to have you on the show this evening. Thanks for taking some time out, and we're going to have a really interesting chat with Leith tonight. A lot to talk about, of course, with interest rates, RBA, New Zealand, house prices, migration, a few other things we can throw in the pot too, so it'll be a really interesting conversation. Just before I bring him in, just remind you, of course, as always, that we don't provide specific financial or legal advice. This is a general conversation only. The chat room is moderated, just bear that in mind, but feel free to share your thoughts and opinions, and I always encourage that. This is as at the 14th of Feb if you're watching in replay. Use at Walk the World if you'd like to get my attention and ask a question. That'll make sure you get into my queue and I'll then see it. I've also enabled Super Chat, which means that you can get your question top of the list, or indeed, if you want to make a contribution to what we do here, always greatly appreciated. Without further ado, we're going to bring Leith in. Hi, Leith.
G'day, Martin. G'day, everyone. Great to be back.
Thank you for coming back on again. We had a chat end of last year, and I know we were talking at that point about, rates probably won't go up that much higher, and maybe we'll see February and different world now, right?
Yeah, totally.
So what's changed in your mind?
Oh, look, I think the inflation's ticked up a bit higher than what anyone was expecting, and certainly it was the rate rise last week. I think everyone pretty much expected a 0.25 last week, but then the real shot across the bow was when the RBA it basically said there's going to be further rises over the next over coming months. So that basically increased the rate profile, and immediately the bond market reacted and lifted their forecasts. CBA, which had been originally tipped only one more, jacked up their forecasts. All the banks have jacked up their forecasts. So now it's like at least 3 more hikes. Looks like that's sort of consensus now, or at least 2. So yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I'm here for the drama. I kind of enjoy watching all this stuff unfold and et cetera, et cetera. So look, it's obviously not great for if you're a mortgage holder. I am one of those, but luckily not a big mortgage. But at the same time, it's we're sort of living through a time at the moment which you look back on in, I guess, 20 years, and it'll be like the equivalent of what happened in the late 80s when they jacked up rates. Although it's much worse now. Obviously, people are holding more debt, but it's like that kind of time in history where when I'm 70 or whatever in like 25 years, and I'm 70, and I'll be talking to my grandkids, I'll be saying, I'll be explaining what happened now. So we'll be talking about the pandemic, and then we'll talk about what happened after the pandemic, and then the whole, the massive rise in interest rates, and probably the housing crash, the global housing crash that followed, the global recession, and, just all that sort of stuff. So, and it's probably the sort of thing that's going to be taught in textbooks as well. So it'll be one of those moments that, economics students in 10 years' time will be talking about this time we're in right now. So as an economist who's been sort of doing this for 20 years, thereabouts, it's quite really interesting time to live through. So from a work perspective, it's probably the most interesting couple of years, but especially like last year and this year has been the most interesting year I've had in doing, say, 12 years of macro business by far, because just the drama, the unprecedentedness of it, not a real word, but it's just been enjoyable from a professional point of view, even if not necessarily from a personal finance point of view, because like most people, my mortgage repayments have gone up probably $1,000 since it all started per month.
Well, certainly in my surveys, I'm seeing more and more people getting more and more desperate. So the social consequences of the decisions that have been taken by the people in charge over the last few years are really now starting to hurt real people. And one of my frustrations is the disconnect between the real world and the real experience of people and what those in authority and those in power and those experts looking in seem to be talking about, because it seems to me there's a big disconnect.
Yeah, and it's basically the policy at the moment is designed around squeezing that 1/3 of households that obviously is carrying mortgage debt. And they tend to be, I guess, people around about my age who've got some 45, like younger than me, or around about my age, who've typically got kids who are sort of young to teenagers at school. It's kind of a financially stressful time of life, and obviously the interest rate hikes impact those people the most. They don't impact you if you're renting, although obviously renters are getting absolutely hammered by rental increases, so they're under pressure. But probably the one group that's, I wouldn't say they're laughing, but is best off is obviously the retiree cohort. They're the ones who accumulate the biggest savings over the pandemic. So the RBA always talks about this massive war chest of savings. Problem is,
distribution.
Yeah, exactly. Mate, the lion's share of that has gone to the over 55s and actually mostly the over 65s. So pretty much it's all gone to them. They're actually, arguably better off, because now they're getting higher interest rates in their savings, whereas the cohort that didn't necessarily save a lot during the pandemic just because of their stage in life or whatever, or they were hit hard by jobs or whatever it is, who've got mortgages are the ones getting absolutely crushed. And then you've got renters who obviously aren't being impacted directly by the interest rates, but they are being impacted because, landlords are passing on rate rises through higher rents. They've got a big shortage of rental properties, got mass immigration coming through at an extraordinary pace. So you've got the third of households that are renting getting absolutely hammered as well. So it's kind of, got 1/3 getting smashed by interest rates, got 1/3 getting smashed by rental increases, which, partly related to rising rates to a degree, and also high immigration. And then you got the other third who are pretty much insulated. And even, I'm not saying they've got it easy, but even if you're a pensioner, for example, you haven't been impacted as much by the inflation because your pension has gone up by the rate of inflation. So it automatically gets adjusted by the inflation rate. Whereas if you're a worker, your wage growth hasn't gone up anywhere near as much as the inflation rate. So your real incomes are gone down. Whereas at least if you're on the age pension, you're at least holding firm on your income.
I will make one point. Self-funded retarees aren't getting the same benefits as the...
No. But they hold the savings, so
that's exactly right.
They generally don't have the mortgage debt.
Well, so more of them do now, actually. Because they've gone into retirement with a lot of debt still. So it is a complex picture. I think the other point is, we talk about the 1/3 of households with a mortgage, but the distribution's quite interesting too, right? Because there's a long tail of people who have quite small mortgages, and it's going to be a bit of pressure, but not a lot. But it's that core element, what I call the marginal borrowers, right? The ones who've got huge mortgages, bought within the last 18 months to 2 years, when rates were ultra low, when the lending standards were ultra loose, when property prices were really, really running away.
And they had FOMO.
Absolutely. And those are the people who I think are now getting really caught, certainly in the surveys. And what's interesting is, if you look at what proportion of people with mortgages do you need to have issues with before the overall mortgage market and property prices really tip over? It's quite an interesting question, right? Because it's not a large proportion. It's about 4%. That's what you need. And we're actually, unfortunately, now getting to that point where there's that proportion of people who are close to the edge.
Yeah, well, if we're not there yet, I imagine we're going to be there in the next 9 months, because 60% of, just as an example, so 60% of first home buyer mortgages in 2022 were fixed rate mortgages. So those 2021, I should have said, were fixed rate mortgages. And so that's up from a historical average of 25%. For the overall mortgage market, fixed rate mortgages historically were about 15% of all mortgages, and they went up to about 45% in 2021. So we had this huge boom in fixed rate mortgages. People jumped in at around 2%. About half of those, I think it is, are going to expire this year, which means that they're going to reset from, say a 2% mortgage rate to probably 6% mortgage rate, possibly more. And especially for those who are, let's say, first home buyers, who bought with, borrowed almost to the maximum, which is what you do when you're a first home buyer according to FOMO and you're trying to get into the market. They borrowed at the maximum, so they're stressed there. It also means that they wouldn't meet the new eligibility requirements to refinance. So they're stuck with their lender. So if their lender offers a dodgy rate, a rate that's higher than the market, once they come off that, they won't be able to refinance because they won't meet there'll likely be negative equity, some of them, which means they don't qualify. Same time, they won't qualify because they don't meet the serviceability buffers to refinance. So they're basically mortgage prisoners. And this is why we've been reading the press about this mortgage prisoners. And these are people who are going to basically come off these cheap fixed rates, go into an expensive variable rate. They won't be able to refinance to a cheaper rate with another lender, which is offering a better deal because they don't qualify anymore. And those are the people that are going to get absolutely hammered. And a recent Finder survey showed that I think it was about 8% of borrowers lied on their applications, admitted to lying. And so, in order to get a mortgage,
probably bigger. So the
UBS, of course it is.
The UBS surveys talked about 30%. Right?
Yeah, I'm sure it's higher than that. But I think 8% sort of embellished their income and embellished or underestimated their expenses in order to qualify for a mortgage. And that was during the FOMO period when prices were rising out of control. They worried they're going to miss out. They basically did everything they could to get on the ladder. Now the rug's been pulled from under them, the prices are falling. So a lot of them are probably negative equity, especially if you bought in a place like Sydney or Brisbane even at the peak. Prices have fallen in Melbourne as well. But if you, especially Sydney, so prices have fallen really heavily, about 14% down if you believe the CoreLogic index. Some areas, obviously that's a citywide average. There'll be some areas like down 20.
It's a lagged Sydney-wide,
of course. But it's a big number. So a lot of them are going to be negative equity who bought, late 2021, got an ultra cheap fixed rate. They're going to roll over this year. And, the whole thing is the decline in house prices has been, yes, very steep. And it's been kind of orderly in the respect that it's been about 1% a month for a while. And in fact, this month, according to CoreLogic, hasn't fallen back much at all. Obviously, that predates the rate rise. But the big question is what's going to happen when these, mortgages do reset? Are we going to see a big spike in forced sales? Now, logically, you think yes. But the other big factor is if we get a spike in unemployment. So if we get a spike in unemployment and you have this fixed rate mortgage reset, and obviously the RBA is jacking up variable rates with 3 rate rises anyway. So you've got a whole bunch of people who are getting stressed anyway on variable mortgages. Are we going to see a huge number of forced sales? Now, that pretty much hasn't happened in my lifetime, but it's a real potential. It could happen this time. If that happens, well, then prices could absolutely plummet. So it'll go from being an orderly, fall where they're just falling steadily to potentially falling off a cliff. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen. We'll have to wait and see. But there is a potential that it gets really ugly, from say mid-year or something. When once you get a critical mass of these, these resetting of these fixed rate mortgages alongside at the same time as the RBA keeps hiking. So the variable rate's going to keep rising. You're going to have the fixed rate down here. It's going to suddenly reset to a level that's going up. It's a real dangerous situation. And KPMG came out with some modelling. I think it was today, or maybe it was yesterday, but and they estimated that for the average borrower in Australia that goes from one of these fixed rates to a variable rate, once they reset, it's going to cost them $16,000 a year. Now that's based on a on an average mortgage size of 600,000, which is the average new mortgage size across Australia. Now, obviously, in a place like Sydney, whose house prices are way out of whack with everywhere else in Australia, that could be $800,000 mortgage, maybe $1 million for some people, so or more. So it's not hard to see that if you're looking at a $16,000 hit to your annual income, or even if you got a smaller mortgage that's $12,000 a year, $1,000 a month, that's a huge amount of money. And that's coming at the same time as everyone's cost of living is going up as well. So they're paying more for their gas and their electricity and all their essentials as well. So you don't have to be rocket science to know that's a pretty dangerous combination and could potentially lead to a bunch of forced sales and very harsh times. So
the KPMG was an interesting piece of work, right? So the 16,000 was the first number that stood out, but the other one was 60 billion, right? That's what they estimate the total extra, if you like, sucking sound out of the economy will be from people now throwing more of their disposable income and everything else into servicing the mortgage. 60 billion, right?
It's a hell of a lot of money. That's 1% GDP, they said.
Yeah, exactly right. And of course, the other observation is that last year, about 80 billion was sucked out of equity mate. So people who refinanced actually were pulling additional equity out to help them get through. That's beginning to get to the point now where people have done that. They can't do it again, right? Because LVRs are falling and the banks are, so economic, the KPMG conclusion was this is a very significant economic thing we're now talking about, right? This is big enough to move the dial on GDP. It's big enough to move the dial on unemployment. And so to my mind, the critical things to look for, as well as delinquencies and those things, which I think will take 18 months to 2 years to show, unemployment may well start to tick up sooner.
Yeah, and you think unemployment would rise anyway because, even like put aside the economy. You can't really put it aside, but let's say the economy doesn't deteriorate in a steady state.
No.
We're looking at, which isn't going to happen, it's going to deteriorate, but on the other side of the coin, we're looking at the biggest increase in labour supply, arguably, in history, because the federal government's has gone for this extreme immigration program where, I'm tipping we could have up to 500,000 population growth this year. I should say 500,000 net overseas migrations, population growth would be even higher. Purely on the fact that we're getting, the Albanese government's opened the floodgates. We're getting international students back at a record pace. All the temporary migrants that we lost over the pandemic are coming back with a gusto. So we're going to have a huge increase in the workforce, even without the economy deteriorating, which means more labour supply means higher unemployment rate, other things equal. Now, if you're going to massively ramp up your labour supply through immigration, at the same time as the economy weakens through this falling consumption, you could get a very serious spike in unemployment. And when that happens, obviously the fixed rate mortgage cliff raises the possibility of forced sales, but what really raises it is if people lose their job.
Yep.
Or, they can't get work, or they've got to take reduced hours, all that sort of stuff. Now, to me, it seems like if you're going to massively increase your labour supply and you're going to have reduced demand, which is what the RBA wants, let's face it, that's exactly what they've said explicitly. They want to, reduce demand and increase unemployment in order to tame inflation. But if you get both those things at the same time, you could get a very, quite a large increase in the unemployment rate and underemployment. So, yeah, it's definitely 2023 is looking like a bit of a nasty year on a lot of levels.
So one of the interesting questions, both the central bank in Australia and the Fed and the UK sheet a lot of the inflation pressures to COVID and then the Ukraine situation. But I wonder what you think. Do you think the seeds were actually laid through the global financial crisis when they basically started taking interest rates lower, when they threw a lot of liquidity and stimulus into the economy? Is that where we should actually look at the root cause of this, or do you think it was a more recent trigger?
It's hard to say because if you went back to, say, the pre-pandemic era, so 2019, whatever, inflation was incredibly low. It was low everywhere. And then obviously the pandemic hit, we got all the stimulus. So government's certainly overstimulated in hindsight. And then obviously we've had all the supply disruptions as well. And, more recently, the whole energy market, debacle as well. So it's hard to say. I mean, I think it's all interrelated. I think if you didn't get the pandemic and you didn't get, all this other stuff that happened, like the war in Ukraine and the supply disruptions from the pandemic, and then the stimulus at the same time. So you've had reduced supply, then the government's pumped demand as well. I don't think inflation would have spiked. I think we would have had the same crappy economy we had pre-pandemic, just more of the same. And the whole reason for that is that the global economy was sort of structurally sick, I guess. And the central banks are constantly trying to prime it with all this, easy money and but then all this stuff that's happened, like since the pandemic, is basically just, it's just been a punch to the face. That's brought on where we're at now. But yeah, definitely, I think you're right in that, in one sense, that the seeds were sown. But I don't think if this other stuff hadn't happened, we could have pretended for a lot longer until something happened like what happened, which is always going to happen at some point, I guess.
And I love the word you use, pretended, right? Because we've had extended and pretend, right, for at least a decade, right?
Oh, easy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's been I think we've always called it Macrobusiness the rat wheel economy.
Yeah.
So especially in Australia's case, like the whole economy has been built on just growing household debt and pumping immigration. It's basically been the economic model here.
Yep.
It hasn't been based on productivity or anything like that.
I wonder when productivity will come on, because I know that's one of the things that you've been very. I mean, it's a critical discussion point, isn't it? Really. Yeah,
but it's more. Look, the whole thing is like, and it's not just productivity; it's neoliberalism. So basically, like you've got kind of two competing, I guess. If you want to get really broad, I mean, there's heaps of different economic models. Like, I'm not talking about China and all these other places, but if you look at the advanced developed countries, you've got the sort of Anglo model, which is what us, New Zealand, Canada, US have done, which has been the cheap money, debt, population Ponzi in us in New Zealand's case, and Canada as well. Just this kind of low quality quantity based growth, and then you've got say the polar opposite of that, and there's obviously in betweens and everything. Would be the Scandinavian countries, who haven't gone down the privatisation circus like the other countries have done, who've basically shrugged the Thatcherism, Reaganism, the neoliberal crap that these other countries have done, and they're in a much like their economies are structurally way healthier than what we've got, and you can see it in places in policies in things like energy. So you've got two competing things where the UK and Norway basically share the North Sea gas, and you've got one who's in an absolute energy crisis because it's let the multinational firms like Shell and BP and everything take over the whole energy sector, and we've done it too here. And then you've got Norway, which kept it all basically in government hands, has a sovereign wealth fund that's worth $100 million US per citizen, and hasn't been gouged by the energy crisis because it looks actually it runs its energy to benefit the people first and foremost, not foreign corporations. So, there's, I don't know, it's pretty bit of a long-winded way to get around it, but us Anglo countries and other countries around the world have basically dug our own graves over the long term. Like we've outsourced everything to China. We've got rid of all the manufacturing. We've basically then just relied on debt and dumb growth. And cheap money and everything to basically grow the pie in a low quality way, and now the chickens are coming under roost. And then you got other places like the Scandinavian countries who've gone for smart growth, like slower population increase, more government ownership. Basically done the opposite of what all the neoliberal stuff is, all the Reaganism and Thatcherism and all that kind of thing. And they've got better economies as a result, with richer citizens in the end. So there's I guess it's a wider discussion, but. There's nothing I hate more than when you get someone like, Ponzi Perrottet, Dominic Perrottet today coming out and he said, you know what, we've got to privatise more of our assets to build the infrastructure in order to meet all the immigration we're getting. which is just like, mate, we've been doing that for 30 years. Yeah. Look where it's gotten us. And you can't drive anywhere in Sydney without Transurban having the fingers in your pocket, because you've basically sold off the entire, roadway. All the toll roads are owned by this private company that just gouges. And it's a definition of insanity to keep doing the same thing over and over again, which is basically what, New South Wales has done, what Victoria's done, what pretty much all the governments in Australia have done. They've done, similar in the UK. The US has been like that forever. Canada's going down the same road. New Zealand, like we're all caught in this stupid neoliberal model, which never, no one ever seems to learn. We just seem to think, we just keep doing the same thing.
Yep.
And that's the solution. We'll just do what didn't work for the last 20 years and just keep doing it. And it's just insane. And
it's worth saying that both sides of politics share the same neoliberal view, right? So it doesn't matter which side of politics is in. The fundamental philosophical point about the way that they want markets to work in a particular way are shared. And of course, the Treasury and other civil servants, that's the doctrine that they all have.
Yeah, and I've talked about it on this show before. Like when I, went to the Australian Treasury in 2003, worked there for 3 years. You're just indoctrinated with this stuff. Well, the first thing you learn is, you have this induction, and back then it was Ken Henry, where we learn about the wellbeing framework. And at the time, I was young, so I was like, oh, yeah, cool. And you're all keen, and you're in there, and it's like, wow, this is awesome in Canberra, like this big, Darth Vader building, and wow, the machinery of government, this kind of stuff. You go there and you look back and you go, man, that was a load of crap. Like the stuff we learned, the 3 Ps framework, population, participation, productivity. Like 2 of them are valid, but the other one is complete garbage, and that's the population growth. Like that somehow makes you better just to keep growing the population.
Yep.
Yet that's the one that basically takes all the focus.
Yep.
And it has, because it's the cheap and easy way to grow the economic pie, even if everyone's share of the pie gets degraded. And that's basically what we've got in Australia. And now, unfortunately, under the Albanese government, they are the biggest population P government we've ever had. And they want to turbocharge it to levels that were never seen before. So it's just like the governments just seem to keep getting dumber and dumber. And, Labor's getting away with it at the moment because they're basically a virtue signalling government. So they want to talk about the voice and all this other stuff. Now, look, I'm not against it. I don't really care. I'll be quite honest. I think it's secondary to a lot of other issues like the rental crisis and everything else that's going on. But unfortunately, like Albo can sort of put out this, this BS housing future fund. We're going to build 30,000 social homes over 5 years. 30,000 social homes, buddy. Yet your government has officially projected that we're going to have nearly 1.2 million migrants arrive over that 5 years. So, net overseas migration under your budget's own forecast and the intergeneration report is for 1,175,000 net overseas migrants to arrive over that 5 years, that you're going to build 30,000 more social homes. That just means the shortage is going to get way worse. It's going to get way worse for the rental market. And, if you think you've got a rental crisis now, under their policies, it's going to get a whole lot worse because you cannot build enough homes to cater for that many people coming in. Like we haven't done it for the 15 years pre-COVID, and we're sure as hell not going to do it now, especially with the building industry suffering from higher input costs, a lot of them going out of business, etc. The supply is going to get hammered. At the same time, you're increasing demand to levels we've never seen before. But it's all good because, I'm doing this housing future fund and, it's all marketing spin. Like Albo is just a softer Scotty from marketing that the coalition had. And he's getting away with it because, the opposition leader is Peter Dutton.
Yes.
So as soon as you got a potato as an opposition leader, you can you look good by default. And because he comes across as a nice bloke, they can shaft you without, and everyone just smiles and goes.
Nice just on the housing future fund, right? 10 billion, right? Which is going to be invested.
Yeah, it's only the returns.
It's the return that's going to actually flow. So if you're lucky, let's say you might get a 5% return, but if you don't get such high returns, then you haven't got much at all. So the way it's positioned, it sounds good in theory until you actually understand how the scheme is designed to work. So you're right. It's a marketing spin position
It's put a number and make it sound good, and then everyone thinks you're doing something.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately and the same with this, we're going to build 1 million homes over 5 years. Well, guess what, mate? The previous 5 years, we built more than 1 million. So we're actually going to do less than what we did in the 5 years leading up to COVID. In the previous 5 years. And same time, population is going to go up way faster because you're ramping immigration. So we're actually going to get worse by your own admission. But, 1 million homes over 5 years sounds great. And this is what they always do. They always say, this year we spent a record amount on health. This year we spent a record amount on education. It's like, well, you bloody hope so, because the population's grown by 400,000, the size of Canberra, and we got inflation. So, of course, you got to spend more every year. But you never spend it. But they never spend enough to keep up with this stuff. And, so it's just like the whole thing is a snow job. And unfortunately, it's going to get a hell of a lot worse, I think. And especially when obviously all these, the interest rate issue, everything else happens. When everything hits the fan this year, and you're going to have, obviously the government doing this. I know I was getting back to Big Australia. I don't always mean to get back to Big Australia, but it is kind of it's
a central thing, isn't it?
Well, it is because it's the every, like, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it is the everything problem. It makes so many of the problems that Australia faces worse. Whether it's going to be water shortages, emissions reduction. Well, how the hell are you going to do that? How are we going to make was it 35% emissions reduction when we're growing the population like a science experiment? How are we going to, how are we going to build enough infrastructure? We never do. How are we going to have enough schools? How are we going to have enough hospitals? How are we going to build enough homes? Like all this stuff just never gets considered. And it's always, they never look at the positives from it, which is, we get a little bit more budget revenue in the short term. And you only get that revenue if you ignore the expenses you got to pay for in order to grow. And I just find it, infuriating. And let me tell you, the only thing that's going to stop Australia from going into a technical recession this year is the fact we're going to have the biggest population flows in history. So it's going to be very hard for Australia to actually have a technical recession if the population grows by 500,000 or more in a year, which it easily will.
Yeah.
According to KPMG, it grew by 440,000 last year, and that was the population, not just immigration, obviously natural increase as well. So we're probably going to do 700 this year, all up, given it's ramping so quickly. So it's going to be actually quite hard to have a technical recession when you have that headwind from, inputs in people and their activity. But I tell you what, the per capita pie is going to shrink.
Yeah.
It's going to shrink quite sharp.
And that's been quite consistent over the last decade plus, isn't it? That effectively quite often we've gone into GDP per capita recession, but the top line number is supported by that massive flow of immigration.
Yeah, which is the last pre-COVID 15 years is 3 times the OECD average.
Yeah.
So,
obviously,
all this stuff about Australia's this, say we go back to January 2020, so before the pandemic hit. We're there boasting that Australia hadn't had a recession for 20 years and we've been this, the star economy. Well, why is that? Because we grew population by 3 times as fast as the OECD average. That's a hell of a tailwind. But they always ignore that we had these little per capita recessions all the way through.
Yep.
And, it's the biggest flaw in economics that they just look at aggregates all the time. They don't look at the per person outcome. It's I find it absolutely infuriating because that's, in the end, the only thing that matters. I'm not talking about per capita GDP because GDP on its own is a crappy measure. But, per capita living standards on all sorts of measures is what should matter. Not just looking at the average, the aggregate all the time. We're growing the pie. We're doing well. It's everyone's slice of the pie that matters.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it doesn't matter if it's the media, if it's Treasury, if it's economists. Pretty much no one does it except for, Macrobusiness and, you and a few others. Like a very small, share of other people actually talk about the per capita outcomes.
No, well, that's, it's an unpopular conversation, isn't it? The per capita story.
Doesn't meet the narrative.
No, exactly right. And by the way, that narrative is the one that the mainstream media still pushes like you wouldn't believe, right? So it's sort of, we don't talk about the per capita, talk about the top line number.
And the whole low unemployment thing we've had. We've had the lowest unemployment for 40 years, 45 years, whatever it is, since the early 70s, nearly 50 years. That's not celebrated as a good thing. It's seen, it's a crisis.
Yep.
we've got a crisis, we've got a skills crisis.
Yep.
Like, oh, mate, like, it's just, that's what we should be, that should be normal.
Yeah.
But it's not, it's not seen as a positive.
So let me just at this point say, any questions, if you've got questions, put them in the chat there at What the World, we'll get to them. Leith, before we get to those questions, let's just look at New Zealand, because I think actually sometimes it's quite good to stand back and look at another economy that's struggling with similar things, except maybe they're doing it more extreme and further down the road, because I would argue that New Zealand is probably in a worse position than us, looking at where things are going, and yet they're still talking about higher interest rates. And in a way, they're probably 6 months ahead of us in terms of the cycle.
Yeah, although, so before the show, Martin was like, "Oh, are there any charts you want to share?" I thought, "Oh no, we'll just talk today." And then, as always happens, when we start these conversations, you then go, "I wish I had that chart, but I didn't think of it." So there was a chart that the RBA published in the Statement of Monetary Policy, and it actually showed the tight in household, mortgage burdens by country, and we were actually well ahead of New Zealand in terms of our households are getting hit way harder than Kiwis. Yep. And the simple reason for that is, although their cash rates are 4.25%, and they started hiking in was it November 2021 or was it October 2021? So they started hiking, over 6 months earlier than us, and their interest rates have gone up higher. They're actually not impacting Kiwi households as much as in Australia, because 85% of their mortgages are fixed rate mortgages. I mean, fairly short term, 1 to 3 years. Yep. So New Zealand's actually going to go through a bigger fixed rate mortgage reset than what we are. So basically in Australia, I think it's 23% of our total mortgages by value are going to reset from those fixed rates to the variable rates. It's the stuff we discussed earlier.
Peak in July.
That's right.
Yep.
Whereas New Zealand, it's half.
Yep.
So New Zealand hasn't actually been impacted as badly from the RBNZ's rate hikes as us, despite them going harder, purely because their households have been more insulated, been on these fixed rates. But that's about to change. So about half of their households this year are going to reset, and they're going to reset at much higher rates. So even despite that, though, New Zealand housing market's down about 15% from its November 2021 peak, according to the Real Estate Institute in New Zealand. Now, that's actually the leading house price index in New Zealand, because that actually counts sales that have happened, not land title stuff that from sales that happened ages ago. And also it adjusts for composition, all that sort of stuff. So that's the one that the RBNZ looks at the most. It's also the one that Tony Alexander is like the housing economist guy in New Zealand, who just tracks this stuff like a hawk. That's the only index he looks at. And so New Zealand's down about 15% from its peak. So it has fallen heavy already. The RBNZ has tipped, I think, a 20% peak to trough decline. Yep. ANZ's tipping at 22%. The RBNZ's tipped the cash rate in New Zealand's going to go up by another 1.25%, I think 5.5%. And they've also tipped a recession for this year. So, it's a pretty nasty set of numbers. And the RBNZ has explicitly said they're basically going to raise rates till they get a recession, because that's how they need to kill inflation. So, I've got to hand to them. At least they're honest. It might seem stupid, but at least they're honest, I guess. They've told Kiwis up front what they're going for. Yeah. And, it's one of the reasons why Jacinda Ardern pulled the pin and said, you know what, I'm out of here. I'm going to lose the election. Kiwis don't like me anymore. We're going to be in recession. Election's going to be in September this year. I've got no chance of winning. See you later. Go out on top. Go out undefeated. And the new guys come in, Chris Luxon, who's he got a little bit of a, I guess a honeymoon bounce in the polls. He's only a little bit behind National, which is their version of the coalition over there. But yeah, look, it's going to be an interesting year, and probably a bad time to be in government in New Zealand, just because you've got an economy going in recession. The housing market's tanking. Home sales in January, according to the REI in New Zealand, Real Estate Institute in New Zealand, which was released today, lowest for a long time. On record, except if you exclude, I think, that 1 month during the GFC when it first hit. Yep. So they were, and their inventory's ballooning. So they've actually got a record low numbers of new stock coming in, yet because home sales have crashed so much, the inventory is still piling up. So their housing market's looking pretty weak. The only thing about it is, though, although the RBNZ signal more rate rises, it doesn't necessarily mean that their mortgage rates are going to go up more, because they're basically all fixed rate over there. So the fixed rate mortgages have already priced in the expectation of a huge increase in the interest rate. So I don't know if their fixed rates have already peaked. Like maybe they have, and there's not that much more, I guess, downside from higher mortgage rates like there are here. But either way, their housing market and economy is looking pretty crap, and they're going to have a probably harder 2023 than us, purely because half of their mortgages are going to reset this year. And just from their cheap fixed rates.
A couple of points. They also are ramping up immigration, so they're trying.
Oh yeah, of course. All the countries are.
Yeah, as is the UK, as is Canada, as is the US to an extent as well. So there's a massive bid for all these migrants, right?
It's a war for talent, man.
It's a war for people.
Yeah, no, it's got nothing to do with talent. It's just get the bodies in here and boost that GDP however you can, and sell debt to them.
And the second point, just to reiterate, this inventory thing's quite interesting, because in Australia, listings are not growing very fast at the moment at all. So quite a few people have actually decided not to put their property on the market. Now, I don't think forced sales in Australia have yet started to bubble through, right?
Oh, no way.
In New Zealand, there are some now stories that looks like there are now some people who are having to sell. Early days.
That's going to get worse.
But they're the ones hanging around because there's nobody wanting to buy them, right? Yeah. And it's that supply-demand disequilibrium that ultimately leads to those price falls, right?
Yeah, for sure. And again, Australia and New Zealand, we're on the same track here.
Yeah. That's my thesis. I think they're a few months ahead, but I suspect we're going to see something similar here in the second half of this year.
Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, I guess we won't know until we look back. And this time next year, we can look back and go, oh, yeah, this is what happened. But, I mean, in some ways, they might be, just for those reasons I said, they might actually be behind us. So I don't know. They're either ahead or they're behind, but we're both in the same. We're both in the same trajectory because, we've got nearly a quarter of our mortgages are resetting this year by value. They've got about half. Yeah. They're going to reset. So they've been insulated for longer because they've been on these fixed rates from the rate rises. We got more variable rates, so we've taken more of our borrowers have taken the hit up front. But at the same time, it's a similar, we're both on a similar trajectory here. Yeah. 2033 is going to be pretty nasty.
And it's just worth saying, we started in May last year. They started the previous October, November.
No, October, yeah. October 2020.
So the ramp up in New Zealand is a little slower than Australia. In fact, the Australian ramp up in percentage terms,
way quicker,
is the quickest ever been. Even if you go back,
I wish another chart. I wish I'd done. I've got a. It's one of those things. I just thought, no, there's nothing I can think of, but this would have been perfect now. So I've got a chart where basically I track all the central bank tightening across all the economies.
Yeah.
Well, not all economies, like basically the Anglo countries plus, I think the Euro as well. And New Zealand is. I think they've increased by the most, or equal most, I think, with Canada, and US. They're all pretty much similar. But New Zealand's has been the most gradual because they started first. And whereas ours has been, perhaps the most aggressive, even though we're about 1% behind those guys.
Yeah.
Ours in percentage terms has been way more aggressive. Basically it's been catch up. But again, we've got the most exposed household in the world. Compared to these, well, not in the world, but compared to these countries, because we're carrying more household debt. Our mortgages are bigger compared to our household income, but also because we have much higher share of variable rate, mortgages than just about any of these countries, any of the other Anglo countries, plus the Euro. So, the Europeans. So that means that when the RBA does hike rates, it hits us quicker. Albeit it doesn't hit us as quickly as it did previously because we had that high share of fixed rate mortgages over the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move the conversation on, because I think we have to talk about Phil Lowe. And a good place to start is his comment. I'm really sorry if people listened to what we said and then acted on that and now regret what they have done. That was from one of his comments last year, which is a bit priceless, really. given what's going on at the moment. And of course, there's a lot of slack being thrown at Lowe by politicians, even some other economists. And now there's a discussion about should he stay, will he stay, etc., etc. To what extent do you think he's pulling the right levers, the wrong levers? Is he feathering his own nest? What's going on?
Well, I think he's gone too hard on rates. I've been pretty honest about that for a while. Part of it's because of that fixed rate mortgage reset that's coming. So we know it's going to tighten anyway. So even if he does nothing, monetary policy is going to tighten significantly this year anyway, because we've got so many people coming off those fixed rates. So they're going to jump from 2% mortgage rates to 6%, or more if he keeps raising. But roughly 2% to 6%, maybe 5.5% if you can get a real discount or something. But a lot of those people aren't going to be able to get discounts because they're not going to qualify anymore to those cheap mortgages. So, the bigger thing that happened this week was the fact that every year it's been tradition for him to do like a public briefing on monetary policy, blah blah blah, the direction. This year he didn't do it, and instead gave a private briefing to Barrenjoey, like this investment firm, and that's pretty bad. If you look at it prima facie, that seems like insider trading to me. What the hell are you doing briefing a market participant? And if you are going to brief a market participant, wouldn't you make that briefing public at the same time as you do it? Like release your exact transcript of what you did so you can inform the market. How is it fair to give a market participant effectively insider information before everyone else has it? At the very least, that's a huge error of judgment. And, I personally think it's, if there wasn't a reason to sack him before this happened, this has got to be the final indictable offence, surely. But anyway, we'll see. But my concern is they're just going to get another RBA hack insider, like someone who already is inside the tent who's been indoctrinated and all their stuff, and promote them. Whereas I'd like to see them actually get an outsider. Get an outsider, get an international expert from somewhere else. But
not another central banker from somewhere else, right? Somebody who's outside of the tent, as it were. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. They can't do much worse, let's face it.
That's probably true.
But this is something, I was talking to Martin about this before we went live, that I think the fact that Lowe, it's on about 1.2 million or something like that. It's a huge...
It's a big number, yeah.
Yeah, it's a big number. And Australia's civil servants are paid way more than just about any other country in the world. So, if you're the head of the Fed in the US, you get paid about $250. The head of Treasury is about $250. Maybe I'm slightly, or maybe $300, but it's way less than what comparative people get paid here. And I think this is a lot of ways, like they always do it to say, we're going to get more talent. I think we get actually worse. I think you're more likely to get, people who are going to do these jobs not for the civil service nature of it, but for the money. And you end up getting, so think about it. If you're on a $1.2 million salary or, 500 plus, if you're on a $500,000 plus salary, not just talking about Lowe, but some of the other department heads, etc., you're going to want to keep your job and lick the boots, I should say, of the of the government of the day in order to keep your job. So you're going to tell them what they want to hear. You're not going to be frank and fearless and blah, blah, blah. And I think it actually creates, worse outcomes and worse policy advice and worse, decision making. And, this whole notion that, we've got to pay them CEO type salaries, in order to get the best talent, I think it's just wrong. And I think there should be a cap on all public servants where, the top guy in the land shouldn't be paid over $500,000. And even that's probably too generous. And do it across all departments and all that. So, like the amount of money that the RBA executives are on is astronomical. So we've got Lowe on that. We've got, other people on about $500,000, and then you got a whole bunch on 300,000. And if you ever actually go through the annual report, it's extraordinary how much they're paid. And
they have a large number of economists under their bailiwick too, right?
Yeah, it's just, the RBA departments, the RBA, I think had about, last time I checked, was over 1,000 staff. It was unbelievable. It's huge. Big number. Yeah. Big number, and a lot of them on, massive salaries. And you just go, well, are we getting value for money out of that?
So let's just talk about the RBA. The RBA's mandate, right, is to look after the interests of Australia and Australians, keep the exchange rate roughly balanced, etc. There's actually nothing about inflation in their mandate.
I'll be honest, mate. I haven't read their mandate for years, so I couldn't. I should probably go and read it tomorrow and have a laugh. But
it's worth reading it because it's so far from what they're doing that is to be remarkably So my point is, if you say those are the objectives that you're measured by, then they're actually not ticking the boxes.
Yeah, but I mean, look, just to play devil's advocate here, though, I don't put all the blame on the RBA. Like, I actually put the blame on the government as well. So, and I remember this because when I worked at the Treasury, I remember I just had a talk with one of the DFA. I'm not going to name him. Good guy. He was actually a good guy. But and he said, "Oh, look, let's face it, the RBA runs economic policy anyway. We don't do that anymore here." And he was right. Like, I thought about it at the time. I was like, it's weird. Why was a Treasury DFA saying that? But that's pretty much what the government has done, though.
Yeah.
So, the federal government, for all the way back since John Howard's days, has pretty much outsourced economic management to the RBA through this one blunt feature, one blunt instrument, which is absolutely absurd. And just on the inflation issue, like, I'd argue that the federal government has more control over inflation than what the RBA does at the moment. They could take the steam out of inflation quite simply by fixing the energy market and arguably not running the big Australia policy, so you take the pressure on rents, which is 6% of the CPI basket. So, energy inflation is one of the big drivers of Australia's inflation at the moment. We've got power bills rocketing. Now, I know they've done the gas cap, the $12 gas cap and stuff, but that doesn't come in for a while, and that'll only have an impact in the second half of the year if it does. Yep. And the way the gas cartel's behaving, they're trying to basically restrict supply and saying we're not doing anything because we're uncertain about the cap. So, if the federal government were a bit stronger and went really hard on these guys, and really drove the gas price down, same with the coal market, drove energy prices down, they could really take the steam out of inflation. And I'd argue that would have way better. That'd be a lot easier. Well, not easier, but they'd be more effective than just the RBA trying to kill demand through raising interest rates. So, but unfortunately, governments of all persuasions have basically just given up, macroeconomic management and just handed it to the RBA, who's got this one tool.
Well, it's convenient for the politicians because they can say it's the RBA's problem rather than their problem. Sure. And it means that they don't have to upset their corporate I was going to say masters, but that might be too strong. But they're, corporate associates. The ones. Remember that both sides of politics are supported by significant donations from large entities across the board. Which, you wonder about the flows of power. I had Cameron Murray on some time ago talking about the informal networks and the way that power actually works in practice. So it maybe isn't too surprising that we don't get politicians who are actually prepared to go up against those large corporates in these sort of critical areas. And so everything just flows back then to the old RBA and so, well, the RBA pulls the interest rate lever, but then, of course, it squeezes a particular proportion of the population, those with large mortgages, to the, until the pipsqueak, because that's basically what they're trying to do. So they actually are trying to impose pain. This is what people don't understand. It is their intention to do it.
And eventually they'll drive a recession.
Yeah.
Whereas, and just like you said, it's because the government, the policymakers, government don't want to do the hard yards and, potentially wear the flak, annoy their donors. But I mean, I'd argue, I know we talk about the energy thing a lot, but going really hard on the energy cartel would be an absolute vote winner. Like there isn't anyone I meet who doesn't think they're a pack of bastards and they need to be reined in. It's just, but unfortunately, it's not helped because we've got the mainstream media, like the AFR just shills for the cartel every day. Runs disinformation. The Australian does it to a lesser degree. Like, it's, so they've basically captured the mainstream media, but really, it'd be incredibly popular with the Aussie people to, bring down power bills, and they could do it. They could do it easily.
Yep.
And that would take the sting out of inflation in a big way. Because let's face it, it's not just the utilities prices are just one component of the CPI, but it also has flow-on effects.
It's the second order, isn't it?
Through all the other things that it jacks up.
The interesting point there is the producer prices shows that there's a lot of inflation trickling through, right? Because everybody adds it to their prices, that adds it to their prices in the supply chains. And so energy might be a base cost, but it actually flows through and then is amplified, plus wages.
All those other components that aren't directly utilities get impacted. And you know, I've got a mate who works in the seed business, like, you know, so for cattle and all sorts of stuff, seed for farms and that sort of stuff. And you know, I was asking him because he was explaining how the rise in energy costs has basically put up their costs and forced them to jack up their prices. So that's not capturing the CPIs and energy cost, but it would be captured. You know, it's still pushing up inflation in another way. And he said the same with, you know, like we probably noticed dairy prices have rocketed. Well, that's because feed costs have gone up. And one of the reasons why feed costs have gone up is because energy costs have gone up. So, you know, it's just, energy is the bedrock of a lot of things.
And it's worth just stressing that's why the inflation problem is so embedded, even now. And that's why it's highly unlikely that we're going to see inflation come down anytime soon. You know, there will be some base effects from some of the big rises earlier on, but there's a whole bunch of additional forces now, including wages, including energy, other factors too, which is going to keep inflation higher for longer. And the blunt instrument of interest rate rises isn't necessarily going to squeeze it very, very quickly, in my view.
No, because it's not demand driven. You know, so it's supply side. And if you actually look at the RBA's statement of monetary policy had breakdown, and it was majority supply side inflation by far. So, you know, but I guess my point was the RBA. Yes, they're not behaving well. I don't think they've you know, they're doing a great job. But at the same time, the federal government could at least take a lot of the sting out of inflation.
There are things they
just
could
do. Truly, the energy market's just the one that's front and centre. Because I guess Macrobusiness, we write about all the time, especially Dave. And it's like, and plus you see it, mate. Like you say, I see my power bills and I go, God, this is, because I know how the sausage is made. And you know when you get it, you know what's happening partly because business partners Dave has been following this for 10 years and we talk about it every day. You know, the federal government could address this, and then that would take the sting out of not just utilities prices, but all those things you just mentioned that are feeding in would be, I mean, you could get disinflation in that stuff. Now, I'm not saying these firms, you know, they probably wouldn't reduce their prices because they want to maintain that they'll get fatter margins.
That's another factor.
Of course. Like, you know, prices never come down. But at least you might prevent further price rises. And the way inflation is measured, it's change over the quarter, right? So even if prices have gone up 100% in a year, you still get zero inflation if they stay at 100%, right? Because it's the change that matters. So I'm not saying they come down, but you could take out pressures for further price rises, which would bring inflation down. So, you know, honestly, the federal government needs to do their job, basically, is what I'm saying. And yes, they made some baby steps last year with the the $12 gas cap and all that stuff, which doesn't even come into the end of March anyway. So it hasn't even been applied yet. But, you know, it's all too little too late because the prices were set last year when they were rocketing. And they're all feeding into utilities prices now. So we're still going to get these power bills rising until mid-year at least because of what happened last year when they didn't address it. So, you know, but they could take strong action now and could bring energy prices right down by smashing the cartel. Is what they should do. And honestly, mate, 90% of Australians would thank them for it because we're all getting it in the neck. There'd only be those who are sort of connected to them in one way, rent seeker who's, living off the cartel in one way, shape or form who complain.
Absolutely. Now, a little while ago, Jason put this up and said, Philo has become on the nose to a lot of people. Will the government, which is impartial, quote unquote, I think, not renew his contract? Once again, nothing to do with government. Send him off or after his entrapment. And there's an interesting question, isn't there? And in fact, in the pre-show poll, I've actually asked people to vote on what they think. Will he get kicked out? Will he not get kicked out? Will the Treasury kick him out, etc., etc.? I mean, it is a live political debate at the moment, but my sense is the Treasury is not keen to have that conversation, really. No, and look, I think if you think about it from a political strategy point of view, now I'm not a political strategist. I hate this stuff, and I hate
politicians in general. But it probably makes more sense to do it after he's jacked rates a few more times. So you could do it, boot him out, and then when the RBA is forced to cut, which I still think they're going to cut it towards the end of the year because they would have made a mistake and they'll have to reverse. You can then, I don't know, even though it's supposed to be independent, you can claim credit for it. Whereas if you kick him out now and then they, raise a few more times while the new person's in, well, then you don't get that credit. So, it might be better just to keep him in as the fall guy for a few more, for another 6 months,
yes,
and then get rid of him when the pressure's really on and everyone hates him and you can go, look, we listened, bang.
Correct. That was my theory was exactly the same. That I don't think they'll do anything in short order.
No.
Right? They'll let the report on the future of the RBA come through and there'll be some suggestions there which will be minor in terms of maybe changing the structure of the board. That'll need time to bed in, blah, blah, blah. Lowe will put the rates up 2 or 3 more times. The economy will go into a sort of a mild recessionary thing. They can then say, well, it was part of monetary policy, it needs to be done, blah, 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 blah. They can say it's nothing to do with us. And then, later on, maybe have a different conversation. But to my mind, if you took Lowe out of the picture now, you've still got all the problems. So it doesn't actually help them politically. Yeah,
no, that's right. Strategically, you're better off waiting. And then, it's pretty cynical, but, let's face it, this is how politicians think. So, it's all they're not doing it for the well-being of us. They're doing it for their own, political.
You mean the politicians look after themselves rather than the country? Oh, shock horror.
Yeah. So, but yeah, definitely, they'll sit on it for a while. They'll wait till the time's right, and then they'll boot him. And they'll probably have a conversation with him before they do it. Say, no, don't worry, mate, we'll look after you. We'll give you this severance package. You'll get, paid out another $1 million or whatever it is. And then you'll probably have it's probably one of the reasons why he did the private meeting with Barrenjoey. Maybe he was, lining something up. I don't know. But who knows? We don't know.
And Jason said, but doesn't that mean that you're going to lead to a structural systemic problem with no one to blame? Yeah, but you can blame him later, right? So timing is everything here, it seems to me. You don't want to do it too early, because if you do it too early, you won't have solved anything, and it will actually create... And the other thing, of course, just to sort of think about that, you think of Liz Truss in the UK and the way that she announced those policies without a lot of stuff in the background and then basically broke the markets.
Yeah.
The markets, I think, would be quite unforgiving at the moment as well, which is something else to bear in mind if they moved it too quickly. So I think it's a later problem rather than a now problem.
And you won't want to do it until, the inflation's coming down, it's resolving itself, etc. Because otherwise you get, I guess they risk getting blamed for it. Oh, you changed the governor, all this bad stuff happened. So, I think they'll wait. But I mean, look, I still think he's dead man walking.
Oh, yeah.
But, he'll just, I don't know. I guess if he can last another 6 months, that's another $600,000 in his pocket. So,
yeah.
I mean, he must just look at every month and go, I'm great. I'm getting paid $200,000 for this month. And $100,000 for this month, $100,000 for next month. It's a lot of money.
Right. Yeah, spending less time in front of the cameras and on it goes. Smooth Operator actually asked this question, which just changing the subject a bit. Nice name. Yeah.
Smooth Operator.
So he's quoting an Aussie company, Closes, which is a white paper manufacturer. And it's a question about jobs. All this migration, are there jobs for the people, right?
Oh, yeah.
The unemployment's very low, right, at the moment? So that would suggest...
They're not great jobs. No. There's lots of jobs. There's cafes, restaurants. You've got, Uber. You got the caring industry. That's the big one now, the big caring industry. You got heaps of jobs.
The bedpan economy, as I've called it. Huh?
Yes, that's it, the bedpan economy.
Yeah.
Basically the areas of the economy that are booming are sort of related to the government in one shape or another. So the caring economy is basically, it's a form of, it's paid for by the government in one way, shape or form, whether it be directly through government hospital, whatever, or through subsidies. There's the caring economy, there's cafes, there's all the people servicing population Ponzi roles, and obviously breeding a ton of people, you got to build houses for them, so you got that as well. But it's all tail wagging the dog industries.
Yeah. the point there is going right back to our productivity discussion from a little while ago, right? Unfortunately, a lot of the jobs that are actually going to be filled won't necessarily increase productivity. Right?
No, they're all extractors.
Yeah.
So they're they're basically how do you describe? They're not jobs that create new wealth.
They're not value creators in their own right. They are effectively people who are circulating the dollars in the existing economy around the economy, right?
Yeah.
Might go around a bit faster, but it doesn't actually create a multiple.
Yeah. Now, I mean, we're obviously not saying that, the health industry is not important.
No.
Of course it is, but the whole thing is you want a balanced economy, and we don't have a balanced economy. We've got too much of a people servicing-based economy now. We've basically offshored all our manufacturing, etc. I mean, again, I guess Dave, when I met him, when he created the moniker "Houses and Holes," was just brilliant. Like, it just was like, yeah, that's it. Houses and holes economy. But really, if you're to change that now, you have to get another one in there for population as well. So. Yeah, I don't know, but it wouldn't sound as good. Like houses and holes, if it goes off your tongue. Like we're going to say population, houses and holes. Doesn't sound right.
No. It's a question of first order and second order relationships, right? Because
that's it.
Yeah. But going back to the fundamental structural issues that we have here, right? Basically we have an economy that's not well set up to create real growth. The manufacturing sector's getting squashed. The power prices are squashing manufacturing even more for those that exist.
And the one area where we do have an advantage, which is obviously minerals and resources, we don't tax it properly. So basically I think I said this last time I was on, we had this extraordinary situation where the terms of trade is, 1 quarter off its all-time high. So our export prices versus what we pay for imports is at, just 1 quarter off the highest it's ever been. So it's pretty much at record highs, and we're running the ginormous trade surplus that we haven't had. Like a trade surplus was unheard of when I was younger, until recently. So running this ginormous trade surplus, yet Australia's income deficit was the highest on record, which makes no sense until you look at what that is. It's because of all the mining profits have gone overseas because they're 90% foreign owned, and this is the whole thing. Like I keep getting back to the energy thing, the gas thing. We've got these extraordinarily high gas prices, yet Australians are worse off. And we've been selling all this gas overseas. It's the same with, our other, but gas is the big one because it's energy, right? So, iron ore, if you have booming iron ore exports that goes overseas, it doesn't impact you domestically because it's not an input into your everyday life. But gas, obviously, it's the marginal price setter for electricity. It heats homes. If you're in Melbourne, for example, it's the primary source of heating. It runs a lot of industry. So if that gas price goes up, you're worse off, domestically. Now that could be offset if we actually owned, like Norway does, the gas export firms. We'd be getting that back through export income. But unfortunately, they're 90% foreign owned. So the gains from those exports and the higher prices goes overseas, and we're just left paying higher costs. So it's actually a profitless boom for us. It's actually a loss-making boom. We've got this extraordinary situation where the one area where Australia does dominate is natural resources, and yet because we don't tax it properly, we're not like Norway, who's got a ginormous sovereign wealth fund, which it accumulates for its citizens. Because we don't do that, basically, we're all worse off. And so, what other industries do you have? And the other thing with that is when you run a population Ponzi and mass immigration model. So, for example, turn of the century, Australia's population was under 20 million. Now it's 26 million. So we've imported more than 6 million people in 22 years. 22 years roughly. And what that's done is that's actually reduced our resources base because we've got a set number of resources in the country that's not dependent on people to sell them to the rest of the world. And that, even if we did tax them properly and we got the rents from those rather than to foreign nationals, we're actually devaluing those rents through more people. So it's an absolutely stupid economic model we're running. Like, can you imagine if Norway, whose population has only grown by 25% since 1960 versus 150%, 160% actually, ran the same population model as us? their sovereign wealth fund, which is worth $100,000 US per citizen, wouldn't be worth $100,000 US per citizen.
Yep.
It'd be worth like $40,000 per citizen because the population would have ballooned so much, or $50,000 per citizen. So, it's just a dumb economic model to run for a resource-rich country. You're effectively growing your population so you can spread the fixed amount of wealth over more people, which makes you poorer, other things equal. And then we obviously add to the problem because we then don't tax it properly and we let multinationals collect all the profits from it. So it's just stupid. So the whole Australian economy is stupid. I'll put it that way. Yeah. Hopefully it made sense. It's a bit of a rant.
No. But that's the point, really, that when you stand back and think about it, you realise that there's no internal logic to actually get to a good outcome.
No.
Right.
In fact, we're actively shooting ourselves in the foot.
Exactly.
Well, sorry, we're not. The government is actively shooting us in the foot.
So the set of economic assumptions that are made and the political assumptions that are being driven are designed ultimately to do three things, it seems to me. One is to shift wealth to a smaller proportion of the total population, property cartel and those things. Secondly, your point about generate a lot of revenue, but then it goes all offshore again because of all the foreign holders. That's really important for people to understand, because if you look at the national accounts, it comes in, but it goes out again. So it doesn't actually stay in Australia. It doesn't benefit us.
No. Actually, it makes us worse off because you end up paying more for our electricity bills and our costs go up.
Yep.
So, which is the one thing. So we've never taxed, say, iron ore exports properly, right? Yep. So, but that has never hurt as much because, although it's a lost opportunity, we could be plugging the budget deficit by having, extra revenue from our iron ore exports, which we don't get. But at least it doesn't, at least with iron ore and, say coking coal, for example, which isn't used in electricity generation. Yes, we're not collecting what we should be getting. That's stupid, but it's not jacking up our costs. Whereas like gas and now even thermal coal to a less extent, but gas, number one, that the ramp up in global price in that and our exports of that, because, 72% of East Coast gas is exported and most of that goes to China.
Yep.
So, so most of it goes to our supposed enemy, China, who pays less than what we do, by the way. And we don't even collect the increased revenue from that because it's 90% foreign owned. So it just goes to foreign, and we collect bugger all royalties on it because the way the petroleum resource rent tax is set up is a joke. Yet all our gas and electricity bills have rocketed. They're going up at massive rates. So we're just worse off.
Yep. It's
just like, honestly, we would be better off as a country if someone got a stick of dynamite or, a couple of sticks of gelignite, went to those export terminals in Gladstone and blew them up. We'd be richer because guess what? We wouldn't be able to export anymore. The domestic gas price would crash because we're not collecting the gains, we're not collecting the rents anyway. It's all going to foreign multinationals. So we'd actually be better off if we'd be better off as a nation if we shut those gas plants down and we didn't export at all.
Right.
Because we then have, probably $2 a gigajoule gas. It'd be dirt cheap or, at least cost of production instead of paying, absurd prices like we're paying now.
Yep. And let me just add another little richness to there. We know that some large corporations are getting huge government flows like subsidised diesel, for example, and those sorts of things, right? Yep. That's another whole area where a lot of our taxes are actually sucked out and are going to those same large organisations, again, many of whom are actually generating profits that are going offshore.
Yeah, and obviously creating greenhouse gases and making it harder to meet emissions targets. Yes. So Australia's got this weird thing where these big trucks, like B-doubles and road trains and that sort of stuff, actually pay less in excise than what you and I pay to drive a motor car. Yep. Even despite the fact that these big trucks create more road damage because they're heavy and they damage. So, if you go up and down the Hume Highway or whatever, they get potholes and that sort of stuff because heavy trucks cause a lot of damage. So it's just absurd. Like why is that? It makes no sense. But it is what it is.
It's power. It goes back to all those power flows and the
just
way
another industry subsidy.
Correct. Yeah. Now, I just want to put this chat up from earlier on. Jerry said, Jared Renner, protectionist, how do you identify others in liberal national LNP, who think the same way to follow the Norway model. Gerard, of course, has taken a stand on a number of very important things, including...
And he's been shafted by his own party, who now want to basically kick him out.
Yeah.
So I read that the other week, and I was just like, man, like I know he's a reader of ours. Like Gerard Rennick's a reader of Macrobusiness.
Well, he's been...
He's like a decent guy.
He's really decent, and was in prime mover in terms of getting the branch closure review up over the last couple of weeks. So that's now happening. So CBA stopped their branch closure program for the duration of the review, which is quite interesting. And
now the Liberal Party is trying to shaft him and his supporters.
Correct.
And the other guy, I just forgot his name. He was South Australian who, God, I hate when this happens, but you just can't think of the name. He got booted out basically by the Xenophon Party, I think it was.
I know who you mean. I see his face, but I can't think of his name.
Yeah, I know. But anyway, he was great because he was really big on the whole, the gas reservation.
Yep.
He did a deal, I think, with the Liberal Party he promised that he passed something on the condition they bought in gas reservation, which they reneged on. I just can't think of the name. Anyway, I'll come to him in a sec. But he's another good guy who's left, like a principled, proper, for the people politician.
Yep.
Who he had, who then got churned out by the machine just for another hack.
Yeah. And that's the problem. And it's interesting talking to some of the politicians who are trying to do the right thing inside this environment, which is very unfriendly to any views that are not mainstream, aligned to the main political agendas. It's very interesting talking to them about how hard it is. Rex Patrick was the suggestion.
Rex Patrick, that's the one. Yeah.
Thank you
good
very
guy.
much.
Excellent. And another one of these guys was one of the good guys, and actually had it was sensible, had our best interests at heart, etc. Got booted, so it's just I don't know, it's just crazy. But it is what it is, and unfortunately, Gerard Rennick, because he wasn't totally on board the mass vaccination thing, which I actually tend to agree with him on. He's now being shafted like that, a bit like Novak Djokovic. Like, whether you like it or hate it, it was sort of history's kind of on his side now. And the way it was treated was pretty poor, I thought. But and this is, I'm triple vax, by the way, so don't go, oh, you're an anti-vaxxer or whatever. But I do actually believe in a bit of personal choice here as well. Because he took that stance, and he was sceptical of the vaccines and admitted that there was actually some people getting harmed by them, which is a fact. Look at Dr. Karen Phelps, the former head of the AMA. Her and her partner got very sick from it. He's been shafted. So, it's a pity, just because we need more people like that in politics. They're actually in it for the right reason. Instead, we're getting these machine men and women who are just part of the machine. So, and lobbied ruthlessly.
So just in the last few minutes, I wanted to talk about one other thing, and we talked about the machine. The regulators, ASIC and APRA, right? Also worth just talking about. We've got a new head of APRA, and the new head of APRA has basically said, well, we could always shrink the 3% buffer on mortgage lending, and now rates are higher than they were. If we need to, which I thought was
That'll happen for sure.
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting observation, and I'm pretty certain it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. Yeah,
for sure. Look, I think that's the if you look back, the APRA shrinking the mortgage buffer down to 2.5%, which I wouldn't have happened. It was one of the things that basically helped boot the house price boom after the Hayne Royal Commission. The other thing, of course, was the coalition winning the election they weren't expected to win, and scrapping negative gearing reform. So that basically put a rocket under prices. So that, and APRA killing the mortgage buffer, or dropping the mortgage buffer to 2.5% originally, were the two things that got that house price boom going. The one leading up to the pandemic. Now, obviously, I think this will be one of the things that's going to kick off the next cycle. So, my personal view, and I'm probably going to be wrong. I mean, let's face it, none of us know. Nothing ever works out the way you think, but is that the RBA will probably end up cutting rates at the end of the year because they've gone too hard. And then I wouldn't be surprised if you see APRA reducing the mortgage buffer from 3% down to maybe 1% or something, because rates are higher, so they're going to argue, oh, you don't need to be have the buffer so high. and then that'll probably kick off the next round of, once mortgage rates start to fall, if they do drop that buffer, well, it means the buffer's going to come down with it quite hard, and you're going to end up with, rates falling pretty quickly, or the borrowing capacity rising very quickly. And when that happens, we'll probably get another house price boom. So, or another decent upswing in house prices, because that's the way Australia works.
So when
tons of people relax lending standards, and 2024 house price boom.
Okay, so you heard it here first, folks. 2024 is the time to buy, right?
Probably wrong, but I wouldn't be surprised. Look, I wouldn't be surprised if, say, okay, I'm just going to go out there and just take an absolute wild guess. Footnote: I'm probably going to be wrong. So that's not financial advice, as it says at the start. It's just me spitballing. RBA is going to cut rates in the, last quarter of the year, and shortly after, we'll probably get house prices maybe beginning to rise at the very end of the year, like just ticking up. And then 2024, it's going to rise, and APRA is going to cut the mortgage buffer, and I'm going to be off to the races again. So we'll see what happens. I know we can probably reconvene this time next year and see if I'm totally way off, which probably a good chance.
Wow.
Because nothing ever works out the way you think. But at the same time, it's kind of the way it works.
It's sort of like we've seen before, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is it. Like I used to, when I looked at the housing market, I look at too many issues. Now it's just look at interest rates and borrowing capacity and lending standards. I think that's pretty much all you need to look at nowadays. There are, obviously immigration, all that sort of stuff is a long-term driver that might, explain why Sydney and Melbourne are growing stronger than some of these other places that didn't have the population growth over like a 15-year period or something. But when you look at it in the short run, it's basically interest rates and borrowing capacity. And so interest rates and lending standards. So if you get both of those things starting to come down, so interest rates come down and APRA drops the mortgage buffer, well, then borrowing capacity is going to rise quite significantly, and then you're going to get another upswing in prices, because you're always going to have the underlying demand there, because we've got an extremely tight rental market. You've got a population Ponzi going on. I mean, who the hell wants to rent at the moment? Like, it's just, I think the thing stopping renters from buying at the moment is A, not much stock, and B, they can't get the money and obviously economic uncertainty. So when those things start to go the other way, well then, why wouldn't you jump in? Because the alternative, renting, sucks. So it's Australia for you. That's how it works.
And then the other thing that you did mention, which I will, I'm expecting the banks to be a little bit more flexible with regard to repayments. They're already extending mortgages. So, you saw Ubank's got the 35-year refinance now. You're just a few extra years.
Japan.
Yeah, 50 plus, right?
It's going to be intergenerational mortgage soon.
Correct, exactly.
It's a one way to play the shell game. So you can sort of, you can lower monthly repayments if you extend the loan terms.
Yeah.
And it's a way to kind of kick the can. I remember when I was a kid, I think it was about 15 years was about the normal term for a mortgage. When I was, I'm 45 now, so when I was young. And then it went to 20 and then 25 and now 30's the normal. So it wasn't so, about 10 years ago, it was probably 25 was the normal. So it's been creeping up over decades.
Yeah.
And, I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 years or so, they'll have the 50-year mortgage.
Oh,
and then
quite sure.
Yeah. And then, that's a way to lower the monthly repayment by a bit, but you extend the, obviously the paying over a longer period. So it just allows people to take out bigger mortgages, increases that borrowing capacity, which allows prices to rise. So, you can see which way it's going to go. Interest rate cut, APRA coming to the party to kick it off again, mass immigration, longer mortgage terms, ingredients for house prices rising again.
So the only question I've got is, if the Fed continues to lift, we've got the CPI coming out overnight, right? If the CPI is higher than expected, the Fed's already saying they're going to lift further. That might stop the RBA dropping. So there's an international connection that's just worth reflecting on a little bit, I think.
I think at the margin. But if we hit a recession and it's like everything goes to I think they'll be forced to. So but who knows? Like, it's just I I think the bottom line is they're going to go too hard and they're going to have to cut. But how far they cut, who knows? Like, we'll find out later on.
Yeah,
and also, like, I think we'll be probably headed towards a global recession anyway. I think everyone pretty much thinks that's coming.
Yeah.
Because all the central banks are doing the same thing at the same time. So, I mean, I'm obviously a bit younger, so not in my lifetime or my adult life have I ever seen a synchronized, rate cycle like this. Like, we're sort of, actually, no, it's not true. I guess during the GFC, we saw them all cut at the same time. So, but yeah, it's just we've got all the central banks doing the same thing at the same time, and it's going to, I think, all end in the same way. So,
yeah,
fun times. Anyway, look, as I said at the start, I'm here for the drama. Like, it's yeah. Look, I realise a lot of people. There's some people who are getting absolutely screwed over, and they're suffering. I'm not laughing at that. I'm not taking joy out of that. But I guess you kind of lose faith when you've been doing this long enough. You lose faith in the political process. The central banks, etc. So now you got to kind of almost take a dispassionate view now and almost laugh at it, because it's just so comical.
Yeah. But I think looking at it from my perspective and through my surveys, what I find is that there is a group of people who are just not aware of any of this stuff at all, right? And basically are just following the rule book as previously, right? And assuming that somebody's looking after them and it's never going to be a problem. There are others that are actually a little bit more sensitive and aware of some of these issues now, and they perhaps are making a different set of decisions. But there's another group as well who, frankly, just throw their hands up in horror and think it's all pretty terrible. I don't see how it's going to get any improvement. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on below the surface, which I'm not sure that actually politicians necessarily are fully aware of, but it's quite clear in my surveys. There's a lot of social undercurrents there.
Oh, totally. Yeah, and I always find it interesting if you just go to a mainstream media article and read the comments, because it actually gives you a bit of hope, because often you read this argument, you read an article and it's by the usual booster of whatever, like X, Y, Z policy, like whether it's a shill of, I always talk about the immigration one, whatever, but yeah, you can pick your issue. And then you often read the comments, and there's actually more people who seem to get it than I thought there would be. So, like, again, I'm going to go back to the population. I know you're all sick of hearing about it. This is what I always talk about. But I guess because I don't know, I've been watching this stuff. So, or say the rental crisis. So there's the last couple of days, or last few weeks, there's been heaps of articles on the rental crisis, right? All these crocodile tears about, we're not doing this, whatever. And perversely, there's been a lot of crocodile tear articles complaining that international students can't find rental accommodation. I'm like, what about the people already here?
Correct.
Like, what about them? They're the ones who vote for you, who you're meant to represent. But there's been a lot of those articles, and when I've been reading the comments for it, you might get 150 articles on, say, the SMH or the Age or whatever. And I'm telling you, there's probably at least half of them are saying, idiot, why are you running a big Australia immigration policy? Well, that's going to make the situation worse. What are you doing? Like, so you read that, and it actually gives you a bit of hope that a lot of the common people do actually know what's going on. I mean, not everything, obviously, but they kind of do know that they've been sold that they've been shafted.
Yep.
And yeah, so I spend more time reading the comments now than actually reading the articles now, actually, because it's always the same crap when you read the articles. It's just vested interest BS, some industry spruiker talking their book, whatever. And then they never talk about the consequences of any of their policies. And then you go and read the comments, and they just call out for what it is. And it's that's quite encouraging. And that sort of makes you think that under it, like socially, a lot of people do know what's going on. I mean, obviously there's heaps that don't.
No.
But there's more than you think that seem to know that whoever's written the article is full of garbage, which is quite encouraging.
There was a lot of garbage written, a lot of vested interests, a lot of people who are, well, frankly, paid for comment.
Yeah, well, it's such a shame the ABC doesn't allow comments in their articles, because I'd love to read, those, and the SBS as well, because you really have to you only get to go to the SMH or the old Fairfax, whatever they call it now, 9. and the Australian to actually read comments, because the AFR doesn't have it either. But they do give you a pretty honest assessment of what's going on, and even the Guardian, which is as virtue signalling fake left as you can get. Even the Guardian often has people calling this BS out. Of course, they censor the comments. Often, I've tried writing a few and I don't even get them published. Not inflammatory, just calling it what it is. It does give you hope that there's more people knowing what's going on than what you perhaps think, based on what's written in the media. Because the media is an echo chamber. It's not reflective of us.
Yep. No, I agree. That's a good way to finish, I think, actually. Lisa, thank you very much, as always. Really enjoyed the conversation. I think you made some very interesting and important points there, and I think the chat agreed too. We should compare notes again down the track as these things develop, right?
As I said, most enjoyable or interesting sort of 18, not quite 18 months, 12 months I've had while I've been doing this, just because of everything's moving so quickly. Unprecedented.
May you live in interesting times, to quote the Chinese proverb, right?
That's right.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And if people want to find out more about what you do, where do they go?
So if you want to see sort of day-to-day stuff, go to www.macrobusiness.com.au. Write a ton of articles every day about this sort of stuff that we've just talked about, alongside my partner in crime, David Llewellyn-Smith, who's like energy expert guy, and he writes a lot of market stuff. And Chris Becker he writes market stuff and covers us when we're on leave. Also, check out nucleuswealth.com.au, chief economist there. Those guys do a great job. They have a lot of information on their site. And also I write a weekly article, or Dave or I, and this week we're writing two, write a weekly article, news.com, about all this sort of stuff as well. Just trying to get the message out beyond macro business. So I've written one this week. It's going to come out hopefully tomorrow, but maybe they often wait a few days, on basically calling out the government for the rental crisis, saying that the rental crisis is self-inflicted and it's been caused by government policy running immigration way too high. And that as long as this happens, we're going to have a permanent rental crisis. So they need to basically, reduce immigration back to sustainable levels so that housing demand keeps up with supply.
Novel idea.
Mate. The whole news.com, I've been bagged a little bit for, why you guys appear on news.com, whatever. It's like, because you got to expand the readership beyond macro business, because we've got the same people come there every day. We've got good traffic, but news.com, whether you love it or hate it, it's the biggest news site in the country. So if you want to write an article on, say, the rental crisis and the immigration issue, there is no better place to put your work. And plus they'll have us as well. Like they let us, they never edit our work. We can put it verbatim, and they're really good like that. So, and they're receptive to it. So we now write a weekly article for news.com. Well, why not? Get the message out wider.
Yep. Well, keep preaching the gospel. Thank you very much for your time tonight, and look forward to the next one. And I'll take you offline and close the show. Thanks, Lee. See ya.
No worries. Thanks, Cheers. Everyone.
There you go. Interesting conversation, very important conversation there. And just to tell you that next week we're going to get some frontline information from Megan Wells, looking specifically at Brisbane, because Brisbane property prices are falling faster than anywhere else at the moment, according to the CoreLogic data at least. So we're going to get some information from her and look at what's going there on the ground. So make a note in your diaries for next Tuesday, the 21st of February, and I'll see you then. And just before I go, the doggies are still there. Whoops, wrong. Hang on. I pushed the wrong button. I want that one. There you go. The doggies are still there. They've hardly... Meteor's decided to turn around and show she's still alive. So there you go. Thank you very much for spending some time with us this evening. Hope you found that useful and interesting. And keep an eye for our recorded shows over the next week or so. And join us next Tuesday for the Brisbane Property Exploration. Thanks. See you next time. This is Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, signing off. Cheerio.